I never imagined that a Saturday grocery run would end with an entire luxury neighborhood losing the kind of police protection money usually can't buy. If you told me that a couple packs of steaks, an old Marine Corps t-shirt, and one woman with too much confidence could cost an HOA nearly $200,000, I would have laughed and told you to quit watching courtroom dramas. But sometimes the strangest stories are the ones that actually happened. And this one still gets brought up whenever someone at the department reminds the rookies that appearances can be dangerously misleading. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm 43 years old, a police district commander in Ventura County, California. Before that, I spent 8 years in the Marine Corps, and after nearly 2 decades in law enforcement, I thought I'd seen every kind of prejudice, every kind of ego, every flavor of entitled behavior you could imagine. Turns out I was wrong. Because sometimes it doesn't happen during a traffic stop or inside an interrogation room. Sometimes it happens while you're carrying groceries into your own house. My wife Emily likes to joke that when I'm off duty, I become the most boring man in America. She's probably right. I mow my own lawn, fix my own sprinklers, grill every chance I get, and spend way too much money at Costco. That Memorial Day weekend was no different. Emily was visiting her sister with our daughter, so I volunteered to host Sunday barbecue for a few friends from work. Nothing fancy, just burgers, ribeyes, cold beer, potato salad, and enough charcoal to make the neighbors jealous. I pulled into Cedar Ridge Preserve around 3 that afternoon, the back of my SUV packed so full that the suspension looked tired. Cedar Ridge was one of those upscale gated communities where every mailbox matched, every hedge was perfectly trimmed, and every resident somehow believed paying expensive HOA dues automatically made them experts on everyone else's business. 62 homes, a clubhouse that looked like a boutique hotel, private walking trails, tennis courts, security gates, and monthly HOA fees that could cover somebody's mortgage in another town. Emily loved the quiet. I loved the garage space. We had lived there almost 4 years, and despite being one of only a handful of black families in the neighborhood, most of our immediate neighbors had been decent people, friendly enough to wave, friendly enough to borrow tools, but there was always a small group who looked at people before they listened to them. You know the type. They smile until they decide you don't belong. I backed into my driveway, opened the rear hatch, and started unloading groceries. 2 bags in one hand, steaks under the other arm, case of beer balanced against my hip. I wasn't exactly dressed like a district commander. Old faded Marine Corps shirt, gym shorts, running shoes that had seen better days. I'd skipped shaving that morning because, honestly, who was I trying to impress? I just reached the front walkway when I heard somebody yell from across the community pool. Hey, finally! Catering showed up. I turned and saw a young guy waving both arms like he was directing airport traffic. Blonde hair, designer sunglasses, maybe 22, 23, expensive swim trunks, surrounded by a crowd of college friends who were already laughing before I even answered. I smiled politely and pointed at myself. Me? Yeah, you, he shouted. Cabana too. Bring the meat over here. We've been waiting forever. I actually chuckled because I honestly thought he was joking. Sorry, man. These are my groceries. His smile disappeared almost instantly. Wait, you're not with the barbecue company? No. Then whose stuff is that? Mine. Where do you live? I nodded toward my driveway. Right there. He looked at my house, then back at me, like his brain refused to connect the two. Seriously? Pretty serious. His buddies stopped laughing. One of them whispered something into his ear. Another shrugged. It could have ended right there. A normal person would have apologized, maybe laughed about the misunderstanding, and we'd all move on with our weekend. Instead, the kid crossed his arms. I've never seen you before. That doesn't surprise me. Well, this neighborhood doesn't allow random vendors walking around. I stared at him for a second before answering. Good thing I'm not random and I'm definitely not a vendor. He pulled out his phone. We'll see about that. I remember thinking, don't do it. Whatever you're about to do, don't. 2 minutes later, a woman in an ivory blazer came power walking across the pool deck with the confidence of someone who had never once doubted herself. Her name was Linda Ashcroft, president of the Cedar Ridge HOA. Late 50s. Perfect hair, pearls around her neck, clipboard tucked under one arm. She smiled at everyone except me. Then she looked me up and down, lingering just long enough on my clothes to tell me exactly what conclusion she'd already reached before saying a single word. Sir, she said, I'm told you're refusing to deliver catering services. I blinked once. I'm unloading groceries. Our residents hired outside vendors today. Are you on the approved list? I'm not a vendor. Then why are you carrying food through the common area? I pointed at my driveway again. Because my kitchen is inside my house. She followed my finger, looked at the house, then back at me. Do you have identification? I reached into my pocket, pulled out my garage remote, unlocked the garage door behind me, and said calmly, Linda, I've lived here for 4 years. Her expression never changed. She glanced inside the garage filled with family bicycles, storage shelves, Emily's SUV, framed holiday decorations, everything that screamed someone actually lived there. None of it seemed to matter. She folded her arms. I'm going to need more proof than that. I took a slow breath, because somewhere deep inside I could already feel this ordinary Saturday quietly becoming something none of us were going to forget. I could have pulled out my driver's license right then and there. I could have shown Linda my property tax statement sitting in the kitchen drawer 10 feet away. I could have walked inside, grabbed half a dozen family photos off the mantel, and proven beyond any doubt that I belonged there. But something about the way she stood there, refusing to acknowledge the obvious, made me realize this wasn't about verification anymore. She wasn't looking for proof. She was looking for confirmation of a story she'd already written in her head. You want proof? I asked calmly. Sure. I pressed the garage remote again, letting the door roll completely open. Emily's SUV sat on one side, my pickup on the other. Fishing gear lined the back wall. My daughter's pink bicycle leaned against a workbench covered in tools. Family camping equipment was stacked neatly beside shelves full of holiday decorations. There wasn't a single thing in that garage that suggested I didn't live there. Linda barely glanced inside before looking back at me. That doesn't establish ownership. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because I honestly didn't know what else to do. You think I broke into someone's garage, parked 2 vehicles inside, decorated it with Christmas lights and family bicycles, then decided to unload Costco groceries? Chad, or whatever his name was, snorted behind her. But Linda silenced him with a raised hand. Sir, I'm asking one final time. Are you an authorized resident? I am a homeowner. Can you prove that? I reached into the grocery bag, pulled out a bundle of unopened mail addressed to my house, and handed it to her. She didn't even touch it. Mail can be stolen. That was the moment everything changed inside my head. Not because I was angry. Surprisingly, I wasn't. After years in law enforcement, anger becomes expensive. It clouds judgment. It makes paperwork longer. No, what I felt was disappointment, the quiet kind that settles into your chest when you realize someone has decided who you are before you've even introduced yourself. Emily and I had talked about moments like this before. Little things. People assuming I was maintenance, asking if I worked landscaping, handing me shopping carts because they thought I was collecting them. None of those moments ruined my day. They were annoying, sure, but life is too short to fight every ignorant assumption. This felt different because Linda had power, and people with power have an obligation to slow down before making accusations. Instead, she reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and hit speaker. 911. What's your emergency? The dispatcher answered professionally. Linda's voice became strangely theatrical. Yes, this is Linda Ashcroft, president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. We have an aggressive trespasser refusing to identify himself. He's pretending to be a resident and appears to be interfering with a community event. I stared at her while she spoke, wondering if at any point she'd hear how ridiculous this sounded. She continued. He may also be attempting to steal HOA property. HOA property? I looked down at the package of ribeye steaks in my hand and almost smiled. Somewhere in another universe. Maybe those steaks belong to the association, not this one. The dispatcher asked if anyone was injured. Linda answered no. The dispatcher asked whether I was making threats. Linda hesitated just long enough for the truth to almost escape before saying, he's being intimidating. I hadn't raised my voice once. I hadn't taken a single step toward her. I simply stood there holding groceries while half the neighborhood watched from the pool deck. I looked directly at Linda and said quietly enough for only her to hear, "You're making a mistake." She lifted her chin. "We'll let the police decide that." I nodded once. Fair enough. Then I picked up the remaining grocery bags, walked past her, unlocked my front door, and went inside without another word. Through the front window, I could still see several neighbors gathered outside. Some looked confused. Others looked uncomfortable. A few seemed genuinely embarrassed. About 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed. The screen read, Assistant Chief Michael Torres. I answered with, Please tell me this isn't about my barbecue. He was already laughing so hard he had to catch his breath. Dan, you've got to hear this recording. I think I already know. Dispatch just flagged it for command review because the responding deputies recognized your address. I leaned against the kitchen counter while unpacking groceries. Did they actually send units? Of course they did. We don't ignore emergency calls. And they arrived, found your driveway, recognized your truck, and realized the so-called trespasser was their district commander. I rubbed my forehead. I figured. Michael's laughter faded into something more serious. You okay? I looked out the window at Linda, who was still standing near the pool talking animatedly to Chad and two board members. Yeah, I answered honestly, just disappointed. You want internal affairs to review the false report? No? Sure? Positive. Then what are you thinking? I smiled slightly. I'm thinking contracts matter. There was silence on the other end. Michael knew exactly which contract I meant. 3 years earlier, after a string of vehicle burglaries, Cedar Ridge had applied for our Community Partnership Safety Program. It wasn't mandatory, wasn't cheap. Communities voluntarily paid for enhanced patrol visibility, vacation home check, neighborhood crime briefings, direct emergency coordination, and priority response protocols whenever resources allowed. The agreement existed because neighborhoods wanted a closer relationship with law enforcement, but there was one clause that almost nobody ever read carefully. Section 8. The agency reserved the right to suspend partnership benefits if the participating organization engaged in conduct that undermined cooperative public safety efforts, including knowingly filing false reports or creating discriminatory barriers that damaged trust between residents and law enforcement. It had been added years earlier after another community abused emergency resources by repeatedly calling police on minority contractors. I remembered helping rewrite that language myself. Monday morning, I arrived at headquarters before sunrise. I made coffee, reviewed weekend reports, then requested the complete recording of Linda's 911 call along with the responding deputy's incident notes. Everything matched exactly what I'd witnessed. No threats, no trespassing, no stolen property, just assumptions dressed up as certainty. Around 9 o'clock, I met with County Counsel and our legal advisor. We reviewed the partnership agreement line by line. Nobody raised an objection. The authority is clear, Counsel finally said. If you believe cooperation has been materially compromised, suspension is permitted. Temporary? I asked. Initially, yes. I signed the notice. Effective immediately, Cedar Ridge would revert to standard county policing. No scheduled patrols. No vacation house checks. No enhanced visibility. No priority response allocation beyond what every taxpayer already received. Emergency calls would still receive police service, obviously, but the premium partnership they had voluntarily purchased was suspended pending board review. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was exactly what the contract allowed. Then I attached something else to the email. The transcript of Linda's own 911 call. Every board member received it. Every homeowner received it, along with a simple paragraph that read, Community partnerships depend upon mutual trust, factual reporting, and respect between residents and public safety personnel. Until those conditions are restored, partnership services are suspended. By lunchtime, my phone had already rung 16 times. I ignored every call. Emily finally texted me after hearing the story from another officer's wife. Please tell me you didn't start a neighborhood civil war. I laughed for the first time in 2 days. No, I replied. They started it. I just read the contract. The consequences showed up faster than anyone expected. Tuesday morning, the security committee requested extra patrols after several teenagers from outside the neighborhood wandered through the walking trails. Standard response. Wednesday afternoon, a landscaping trailer disappeared from a construction lot before deputies arrived. Standard response. Thursday evening, residents flooded the HOA Facebook page asking why patrol cars had suddenly vanished. Nobody on the board answered. By Friday afternoon, homeowners were no longer arguing about me. They were arguing about Linda. People wanted to know why an expensive partnership had disappeared overnight, why the county had cited loss of cooperative trust, why every homeowner had received that strange email containing a transcript that made their HOA president sound reckless, arrogant, and completely unwilling to admit she had made a simple mistake. And somewhere around that point, for the first time all week, I realized this story was no longer about one embarrassing afternoon by the pool. It had become something much bigger. and Linda was finally beginning to understand that every decision made by someone in authority eventually comes with a bill. The emergency board meeting happened the following Monday evening, and for the first time since Emily and I had moved into Cedar Ridge, the clubhouse parking lot was completely full. Usually those meetings attracted the same 10 retirees arguing about landscaping budgets or mailbox colors. This time nearly every homeowner showed up. Some were angry, some were curious, most simply wanted answers. I arrived 5 minutes early wearing a navy suit instead of gym shorts, not because I wanted to make a statement, but because I had come directly from headquarters. As I walked through the doors, conversation stopped for just a second before quietly starting again. A few neighbors nodded politely. Others looked away, embarrassed that they had watched the whole thing unfold without saying a word. Linda was already seated at the front table with the rest of the board. She looked exhausted. The confidence I'd seen beside the pool was gone, replaced by the expression of someone who had spent an entire week explaining the same mistake over and over without finding a version that sounded reasonable. "Commander Brooks," she said carefully, "thank you for coming." I smiled politely. "You invited me." The association's attorney asked me to explain the suspension. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't embarrass anyone. I simply walked through the agreement one section at a time, pointing out that community partnerships only worked when residents reported facts instead of assumptions. Then I played the recording of the 911 call. Hearing it in that quiet room felt different than reading the transcript. Every pause, every accusation, every exaggerated description echoed through the clubhouse speakers. Nobody interrupted. Nobody defended it. When the recording ended, the room stayed silent for several long seconds. Finally, an older homeowner stood up. "Linda, why didn't you just ask the man where he lived?" Another neighbor added. "Or apologize after you realized he was a resident?" A third asked the question everyone had been thinking. "How much is this mistake costing us?" The association's treasurer cleared his throat before answering. Restoring the partnership would require a reinstatement fee, renewed training requirements for board members, and a multi-year commitment under revised terms. The total wasn't quite as dramatic as neighborhood rumors claimed, but it was still well into six figures. You could almost hear people calculating what that meant for future HOA dues. Linda slowly stood. She looked at me, then at the homeowner she'd represented for years. "Commander Brooks," she began, her voice noticeably quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I owe you an apology. I made an assumption I should never have made. I allowed my position to replace basic respect and common sense. I embarrassed you in front of your neighbors, wasted public resources, and damaged trust within this community. There isn't an excuse for that." She turned toward the audience. "And I owe every homeowner here an apology as well." For a moment, I thought about everything that had happened over the previous week. The groceries, the pool deck, the phone call, the deputies laughing because they couldn't believe dispatch had sent officers to investigate their own commander. Then I remembered something an old Marine gunnery sergeant used to tell us. Character isn't revealed when you're right, it's revealed after you've been proven wrong. I nodded once. Apology accepted. The room relaxed almost instantly, not because everything had been fixed, but because everyone finally understood that accountability had happened. The board unanimously approved the revised partnership agreement, including mandatory bias awareness training for board members and volunteer committee chairs. Linda also announced she would step down at the end of her term rather than seek re-election. As people began leaving the meeting, Chad approached me by himself. He looked nothing like the cocky kid from the pool. "Sir," he said awkwardly, "I wanted to apologize too. I acted like an idiot." I smiled. "You did." He laughed nervously. "Fair enough." Then he surprised me. "Honestly, I never thought about how fast people judge someone until this happened." "Most people don't," I answered, "until they're the one being judged." We shook hands, and that was the end of it. These days, Cedar Ridge is a different neighborhood than it was back then. We still have barbecues. We still argue about landscaping every now and then. But people wave a little more often. New neighbors get introduced instead of quietly analyzed from behind their curtains. And every Memorial Day weekend, Emily jokes that I should wear a suit to Costco just to avoid confusing anybody. I tell her the old Marine shirt stays. If someone can't recognize a homeowner without a badge or a business card, that's their lesson to learn, not mine. Looking back, I never wanted anyone to lose police services, pay more money, or become the subject of neighborhood gossip. I simply believe that authority, whether it's a police badge or an HOA title, comes with the same responsibility. Slow down, verify the facts, And remember, there's a human being standing in front of you. If Linda had started with one simple sentence, "Hi, I don't think we've met," none of this would have happened. Instead, one assumption became a 911 call. One 911 call became a contract review. And one contract review changed an entire community. Now I'm curious what you think. Did I handle the situation the right way by letting the contract speak for itself? Or should I have accepted the apology and moved on before the suspension ever happened? If you were in my position, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this always spark strong opinions, and I'd genuinely like to hear yours. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes first impressions are always right. Sometimes the biggest lessons begin with the smallest assumptions.